Today's episode will be with Douglas Batchelor from the excellent podcast, What Magic Is This? This is a fascinating chat with some really interesting stuff in it. So without further ado. Today I'm going to be interviewing Douglas Batchelor. Doug, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's great. It's a Thursday afternoon. It's 2 in the afternoon, and I'm wearing slippers.
Yes,
So
and it looks
everything's great.
quite bright out there.
Yeah, we got some sun. I think spring is around the corner here, so I think
Awesome.
we rounded the post.
Yeah, because I think it. Where are you based?
I live
Toronto.
I live in Canada, so I live in Toronto, which is kind of further south in Canada, but we still get winter. We still have
Yeah,
the
you still have
Canadian winter.
minus,
So. Oh
unbelievable
yeah,
minus.
yeah,
Yeah. Things
yeah.
that we would not understand here in the UK.
No.
We think minus one is shocking. Yeah,
Oh my goodness, -1. That's t-shirt weather where I am.
exactly. I know. We don't have any trees exploding or anything like that.
No, oh man.
So, traditional first question then, Douglas.
Mhm.
What do you do?
I am currently I am a podcaster within the realm of the esoteric, magic, and the occult. It is a podcast that I started back in the summer of 2019. I had been ruminating about starting a podcast for a long time before then, and I really took my time trying to think of doing something different to provide something completely different than what everybody else was providing. So my podcast, for the most part, is topic based as opposed to personality based. When you listen to most occult podcasts, it's going to be with people that are like just having a chat with other occultists. And I noticed there was a discernible lack of podcasts out there for people who were starting out in magic or were just magic curious. I find most people are just magic curious because they'll hear about it from some place or they'll see it in like in a bookstore. There's like a little magic section, and they'll go, "Oh, okay, interesting." And then they'll go home and they'll try to look up these podcasts. And as soon as they start the podcasts, the guest and the host are usually talking about things, and they know what they're talking about, but you, the listener, have absolutely no idea. And so it gets really sticky because I love magic and I want more people to be involved in magic. I truly think that it is the special stuff on which the universe runs. We just have no idea what it is. So I wanted to provide a way of being able to show people how magic can work in some respects, the certain aspects of magic, and explain it to them so that they're not woefully lost. So I've been having this podcast for just over 2 years, coming up on 3 years here. I can't believe it's been almost 3 years, but yeah, I just try to put forth as much information as I can. Not to toot my own horn, I've been an active practical magician since 2003. I read a ton. I'm magically operant to this day. I do a lot of magical rituals, a lot of ceremonies, those kind of things, and I just didn't have a place for it. It's like I have all of this stuff, and I want to share it, but I don't have any way of doing that. And I just thought the best way of doing that is through podcasting at this point. So that's basically what I do. I'm just trying to make things a little bit easier for people that are interested in magic because I love it. It is the first thing that I think about in the morning, and it's the last thing I think about before I go to sleep. And sometimes even while I sleep, it's what I think about. But yeah, I just really, so when somebody asks me what do I do, I just basically say I share my love of magic. That's it.
Yeah. So when did you get interested in magic? I mean, what sort of things happened to you early on that made you go like, that's strange?
Well, it's one of those things where I've always been very interested in paranormal and supernatural phenomena. And I mean, the the people that I look up to, they would say that those terms are a little bit iffy, and I would agree. Like
Yeah,
what para is like beside normal, supernatural. Like what isn't natural, right?
yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
I've always been interested in these kind of things. I grew up with a very clear understanding that the way that the world works and how it was explained to me through things like school and my peers was completely insufficient. And I had tons of experiences when I was younger. I mean, in retrospect now, I'd say like they were spirit based experiences. I experienced and saw and heard things that I would classify now as spirits. But what I was being told was that I was actually probably mentally ill, or going through great periods of stress, which I was. Like these things aren't mutually exclusive. But it wasn't until I had a couple of really good teachers in high school, and they were one in particular who was my grade 11 teacher, and he was the one who introduced me to the work of Robertson Davies, who wrote a book called Fifth Business, and
Oh,
it's about Canada. And but what happens in this book is that Carl Jung is introduced in this book, and so I'd
okay.
never heard of this Carl Jung character. And
Yeah,
as soon as I got some Carl Jung books, it was like, oh, he's talking about the things that I'm experiencing, even if it wasn't like the best written. I don't think Carl Jung's a very good writer,
no.
but I think that the stuff he was talking about was very interesting to me. So I started to get in on that, and it wasn't until 2003 when I was introduced to the idea of chaos magic by somebody by the name of Grant Morrison, who was a comic book writer. I'd never
Yeah,
read his comics before, but he was talking about how drawing a little glyph, and you base that glyph around an ambition you have and a desire that you have, and then it might come true if you do a certain ritual around it. And I went, what on earth is this?
mm,
And for a period of about 5 days after I bumped up against this Grant Morrison concept, I had a series every night where I would have the most vivid dreams,
yeah,
and they were beyond anything I have experienced since. And it just was basically like, you need to go there. You need to start doing these things because this is what you've been experiencing beforehand. You did not have a way of contextualizing. This is where you get your context. So that's basically in 2003 in November, I wrote in a little diary, and I have it still written there. Still, I just basically said like, I think I might be a magician,
mm.
and I've been calling myself a magician of some kind
So,
ever since.
how old were you then? Sorry, this is a bit rude to ask, but I'm
I
rude anyway. So let's. How old were you?
I would have been 2003. I would have been 20. I would have been 20 years old.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you see, there's lots of interesting things within that. You know, the whole creative thing about how these experiences happen to you, particularly as as a child. Um, you have imaginary friends and
Yeah.
all that type of thing. Um, See, I had a really strange experience growing up because my mother had trained to be a medium, so
Okay.
spiritualist medium. So I lived in a house that things happened, and it was just like normal, right?
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, it was interesting, and I lived in Cornwall,
Okay.
which is very
Magical
yeah,
place.
very magical
Yes.
place, and also looking back at it, I realised that there was a lot of stuff going on that was just sort of in plain sight. Kids would talk about, just things like, oh, it's such and such, and you could look in the mirror tonight and see the person that you're going to marry. That was just normal banter. That
Right.
somebody that was just your mate would just come out with something like that. Um,
Yeah.
so what happened to me was I didn't realise that I was odd. until quite a lot later on, and started to realise that people didn't see the world like I
Right.
that I did. But again, a lot of this stuff is about experiences that, and of course, nobody was telling me that I was ill, so I was very, very lucky.
Yeah.
But I've spoken to a lot of people who are, you know, creative people who are effectively, in some shape or form, magically operant. They are
Mhm.
either people that would say that, yeah, they are magicians, or they're just artists who, when they tell you their stories, you look at that and you sort of squint at it and you go, yeah, I know that one. I've seen
Right.
that. Um, but as you say, it's like contextualizing, because we've got now, and of course this has become even worse because the education system has become so sort of formalized in such a way that now there's no wiggle room for experiences like that unless somebody goes, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you aren't boring like the rest of us, so there must be something wrong with you.
Yeah.
um, and and I had a conversation with somebody, as you saying about people saying that you might not be well, but you were under a lot of stress or whatever. Um, and he had a similar experience. But of course, the thing is that to bring on those experiences, people used to do things that stressed the body, didn't they?
They
Sleep
did.
deprivation,
Hmm.
pain, or ecstatic states. Dancing till you wanted to collapse.
Yeah.
Starving yourself. Um, and we just sort of think, well, yeah, of course, that's not the norm. So in that
Right.
way, it's not normal. But it was certainly an experience that we would have all had at one point or another, because food would run out, or you were under a situation where you had to walk for miles and miles and miles, and you might have some strange experience in that period of time, and that was considered as normal.
Absolutely.
So when you found Jung, um, as I think most of us do at some point,
You have to at some point.
and
Yeah.
and then you started to put stuff around that. You mentioned Grant Morrison, and I think you were talking about the disinfo thing, weren't you? That conference that was
Yeah. Yeah.
quite explosive. That
Yeah. It was for me.
yes, yeah, exactly. So what then starts to happen? What's your route in? Because you said chaos magic, so you might have to
Yeah.
explain that, because not everybody who listens to this knows what chaos magic sort of is.
Well, chaos magic is a paradigm via which, and it was kind of formulated in the late '70s by a group of magicians, and particularly in England, a lot around Leeds, in and around Leeds. But they had this idea that it wasn't so much the details of the what of rituals themselves, it's how one does it. And so chaos magic is basically saying that you can take anything as so long as you believe in it, and to utilize that for magical ends. And I know there's some people that would probably sorry, there's just a side. I live right in downtown Toronto.
Oh, sorry, don't worry. Sirens are good.
um, but it would basically say like a chaos magician would basically go like, if I wanted to try something, it can be from anywhere, it can be from any magical tradition, it can be even from a different religion that is different than the one that I'm brought up in, and I'm going to give it a shot to see if it works. So it at base it was results based at the very beginning. So if you try things and it works, then keep doing it, right? If it doesn't, you discard it and you try something else.
Yeah,
So for myself, being influenced by Grant Morrison and this idea of sigils, that was kind of the first testing waters. So I immediately, using something that he talked about in a book that was in it called Book of Lies, that was also released by Disinfo. He writes down how to create a sigil. So I did and created a sigil, and they started coming true.
yeah,
Like stuff right out of left field. Like
yeah, yeah.
I barely knew what I was doing, but I was like, this seems like a bit of a stretch. I'm going to give it a shot. And they worked, and they work very, very quickly. So that basically was like, all right, there's definitely something here. And so I would just try to research. So very early, I got the work of Pete Carroll, who wrote a book called Liber Null and Psychonaut. I got a book by Phil Hine, which is called Condensed Chaos, which is about chaos magic. And I would just try as much of that stuff out as possible, just trying to see how it would go. And so that led me just down this chaos magic route. And eventually, what one will learn when they're engaging, particularly with something like sigils, other occultists have talked about it. They call it like the tennis effect, which is when you start doing something new. Let's use the example of tennis. You might be playing against somebody who's actually quite experienced, and so when your very first game of tennis, you might actually even win that game. You're actually not even thinking about what you're doing,
Yeah.
and you win again. You're like, oh my goodness, I'm really good at tennis. And then you play tennis again against another experienced person, and you might even win that game. It's like, oh, I'm a natural tennis player. Like, this is what I do. And then you start to analyze what you're doing. And then your third game, you're shit.
Yeah.
You're so bad, it's atrocious. And then your fourth game is awful. Your fifth game is awful. And this happens with magic. Usually your very first dalliances into magic will be incredibly successful to the point where you're just like, I am Gandalf. Like, I'm great. And then that's going to drop off. So this happened with me with chaos magic. I was really good at chaos magic to begin with, and for a period of about a year and a half, I was like super good. And then it just wasn't working anymore. It wasn't doing anything. So I started to look into different forms of magic, and in particular, as growing up in Canada, a lot of the things that are available to you is going to be stuff that's going to be based on Aleister Crowley and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Aleister Crowley, late 19th century, early 20th century magician. If you type in magic occult into Google, one of the first things that's going to come up is
Crowley,
Aleister
yeah.
Crowley. Yeah, right. Golden Dawn is just there's just a dearth of
Yeah.
books about the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. William Butler Yeats was a member. Florence Farr was a member. Arthur Machen, really popular. So I started to do that kind of magic, and I was under the apprehension that because a lot of figures that I looked up to, people like Alan Moore,
Yes.
was very big onto these figures, that this magic was somehow more austere than chaos magic. Chaos magic was kid stuff compared to this stuff. And so I just went down that road for about 7 years, calling myself a Thelemite, which is what
Yeah.
Aleister Crowley called his religion, was Thelema. And I would just keep doing this stuff and these very these very austere rituals, and it's very cut and paste, and it was just like it's cut and dry. You do this thing, you do this thing, you do this thing. But it was more mystical. It's more mystical than magical, and so I don't look back at my time in engaging with this magic as being not fruitful. It was fun. It was interesting, but it wasn't the reason that I started doing magic. And which is to say, like, to engage in the anomalous, to have the experiences I had when I was younger before I could contextualize them as being magical or spirit based in some way. And so I eventually drifted back to kind of where I am now, which is doing things that are a little bit more chaos magic influenced. And that was mainly done through falling in love with a specific document, which is actually a collection of documents, which is called the Greek Magical
Oh,
Papyri.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So those are incredibly ancient. These are old scrolls from ancient Egypt, and they have spells. It's like how in the 90s there were those books that were put out by certain publishers, like Spell a Day, and they were like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
really
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But this was from Thebes,
Yeah.
Egypt. This was from Alexandria, and they're way out there. Like, there's some stuff that even reading it today, you're like, what is this stuff?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's basically where I've kind of my magic is now a lot more text based. So I'm going off of things like the Greek magical papyri and things like grimoires. And for people that don't know what a grimoire is, these were books of magic that were produced, and they go through spirits, how to summon spirits, crafting talismans and things like that. So that's basically where I'm taking my cues from for the most part. But with that initial spark that I had of chaos magic, where am I getting the results that I want? Am I doing the things that I want? I'm much happier
Yes,
these days.
that's great, because I do think there comes a point when, because again, I can draw comparisons and parallels between magic and creativity, art and all the rest of it. And you mentioned Alan Moore. I mean, Alan
Yeah,
Moore's thing is that artists are magicians.
correct.
Um, and so when I sort of think about that, there is that sort of thing of finding yourself, and it becoming, you become the artist, you become the magician, and the magician
Right.
become, your life becomes magical, your life becomes artistic, um, which is one of those things I think people find very difficult to grasp at first, unless you're naturally like that. Because
Right.
again, a lot of people learn, going back to the thing about music or art, you have this sort of thing, or you do this and then you do that. And then the technique, and again, I could draw comparisons with magic here, the technique is mistaken for the thing itself, if you see what I mean.
Bingo. Bingo.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
So, when you look at the technique and the process and the ritual of art, or the ritual of magic, it's actually what sits inside it is the thing.
Yeah.
But it's your way of being able to draw on that, and I often think that with music and teaching people to sort of write songs and stuff, because I use things like cut up for this,
Mm,
and of course that is blatantly a magical process anyway by
100%.
Burroughs, right?
Yeah.
And the things that happen when, when you do this, they are, you're in the world of the weird. As soon as that happens, it's like anything's going to happen, and it will. Um,
Yes.
you just have to watch and whatever. I had a situation where I went and I did something. We have a lot of little hippie festivals in Sussex,
Okay.
um, and I did a talk using sort of cut up, so getting people to write songs, and it took a handful of guitars and a couple of bits and pieces, and a flip chart and a load of books, so that
Uh-huh.
just handed them out. And I was doing this sort of slot in the afternoon. I got these people just to take random phrases and stuff and write them down. National Geographic magazines and some color supplements and bits of books and yeah. So I was writing this stuff down, and I got about a page of a flip chart,
Right.
and then somebody went, "This is very weird," and I hadn't said anything at this point about the fact where this comes from. She says, "It's very strange because that song that we're creating is literally what we were doing this morning. It's describing what we did this morning."
Yeah.
And I hadn't been there in the morning, so I had no idea what these people had done.
Right.
And so then I had to sort of go, well, this technique, I had to then explain where it comes from and what Burroughs was using and Geisen were using cut up for. And I find that really amazing, because suddenly you realize you're tapping into the same thing.
Yeah.
That creative process is a magical process. Like when people talk about, they sat down and there was this song. They woke up and there was a song,
Right.
and it was there. It's like, what's that? Where did that come from? So yeah, so I think hearing what you're saying about that sort of thing of finding, something like, and you were saying about starting out, that beginner's luck thing
Yeah.
that happens. That happens with kids writing songs.
Mm. Hmm.
Children who are 7 and 8 could write a song. You show them a technique, they create a song, and it's amazing. Like, you would never know that they've created something. They'll take a melody that they've learned, and it could be something like Happy Birthday, and they change the notes around, they come up with another song, and then they'll throw some extra bits in. And you
Yeah.
think, okay, and you have to keep sort of pinching yourself and thinking, okay, this is an 8-year-old, and they've just written a song, there's loads of chromatic bits in here. And it's
Right.
amazing, yeah.
My
Yeah.
mother was in early childhood education. That's her specialty. She's got a master's, and so I've always been surrounded by children, by kids. And I was one situation where she had this one kid who was picked on in school. Uh, lived I lived out in the country in Alberta, Canada. So I was raised in the Rockies there. And this kid was, when I say a neighbor, I mean this person was like 10 kilometers away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But my mother decided to have her over. She was 8 years old, 8 or 9 years old, and my mother had a piano. She always wanted to play piano, and she was just going through the piano stuff with this one kid. And I was sitting, I think, doing my homework or something like that. And then my mother walks away, and then this kid just starts going on the piano, never having played it before.
Mm.
They were playing like it was like they had an almost like savant like skill.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting. I would say that this kid was probably a little bit developmentally challenged at the outset, definitely antisocial, but they immediately were able to grok how a melody comes about from sitting at a piano for less than an hour.
Yes.
It was shocking. I've always said that you will never be as magical as you were when you were 6 years old, and
Exactly.
there's part of that I believe that's true.
Mm.
But yeah, it's amazing stuff.
So yeah, so that's the type of thing that when you're when one works with young kids, most of my teaching ideas come from just watching children, and
Right?
just sort of thinking, well, okay, there seems to be a natural leaning towards this experimentation. Uh, you know, let's face it, by the time a child gets to school, they've got extraordinary control over their own body,
Yeah.
which we will never have again,
No.
um, in that sort of way. Then an abundance of energy and an ability to communicate and speak a language that is so fluent,
Mhm.
um, and they haven't actually been schooled in it. They've just maybe just listened and maybe occasionally corrected by their parents because they got that word wrong. But apart from that, that's all their own stuff, and they've got all their social skills, in and they're virtually formed at that point. And you think, so this idea of getting children, sitting them down, and almost sort of telling them they don't know anything,
Yeah.
it's just amazing. So and I think really, again, that's that sort of magical thing again with children. They have that ability to be able to think the unthinkable.
I think
In
think the unthinkable, but also I think there's in a lot of cases there's just a fearlessness
Yes,
from being judged.
yes,
They're
that's
in
nicely
many
put,
cases
actually.
they are beholden to nobody else's standards,
Mm.
which I think by the time we turn 11 or 12, something happens. There's there's a confluence of factors that occur, and that's kind of squeezed out of us. But children from the age of 3 to 10, they they don't care what you think, right?
No, no, I don't
They're
think they do. I don't
they're
think
they're
they do.
doing the thing because that it just comes naturally to them. And I think that, I mean, we can speak with very, um, very rosy colored memories of children, but I think that a lot of kids, they just don't care what you think, and they just ride what is almost like the first impulse, first intuition, that's just readily available. And it's been described by certain mystics throughout time, and this kind of stuff. Words like akashic record get used and stuff like that. I don't know if that's something that we need to get into, but I truly think that at base, kids are fearless and intuitive in a way that is, from this point, like, I can only speak for myself magically. I'm trying to get back there. Like,
Yes.
I'm trying to get into that again.
That the thing about the fearlessness, I think, is really important because as adults, we sort of lost the courage, you know.
Hmm.
And I think it's sort of evident with what's happened over the last couple of years. But that I think the pandemic was just something that acted as a catalyst,
Hmm.
because it was well before that you looked at people's lives and you think, well, you know, at some point our ancestors must have lived with this sort of fearlessness about life, that you didn't know how long it was going to go for,
Yeah.
and every moment was the thing that you were in. And and obviously, and I pondered this and spoke to somebody about this the other day, about the sort of nativity story.
Hmm.
And you get the wise men. There's a lot of stuff obviously within the magical
There is.
community about the sort of magi and everything. But
Yes.
the ones I think actually are the real heroes of this are the shepherds. Because why would you, as an angel, go and tell the shepherds what's going on in that story? And of course, if you sort of squint at that, I mean, you could, they, the angels could have gone and spoken to somebody else,
Right.
but they picked on the shepherds. And you think, well, yeah, shepherds, they spent a lot of time on their own, right? They might have had a couple of dogs or something to keep whatever was out there getting the sheep, but they
Right.
spent a lot of time on their own. And of course, that's almost like, you know, time to ponder and contemplate the world and
That's
see
right.
nature. And I think actually that's one of those sort of bits in that story that always gets overlooked.
Right.
Why the shepherds? Like, they are actually really important. And
Yeah.
and I think that sort of fearlessness about life comes from that thing of those type of people who knew who they were. In the scheme of things, they
They
knew who
had
they
their
were.
they had their lot
Yes,
already designed for them.
yes, but they lived it. Because
Yeah.
we've got this thing now of like, well, you can be whatever you want to be, and all that type of attitude. And you think, well,
Right.
the problem with that is, do you actually know who you want to be? And I think that's a burning question at the heart of artistry and being a magician as well. Who are you? It's quite a
Right.
mystical question, actually, isn't it? Really?
Very much so. I think a lot of people think, as far as magic is concerned, that is like the end point of magic is this idea of self-transformation and
Mm,
self-realization, which
mm,
I can speak historically from magic. That's a fairly new concept. There was
yeah,
parts in it, like as far as practical magic is concerned. There's always kind of been this thing of like
yeah,
making yourself good, particularly through things like grimoires. It's like you got to make yourself
yeah,
holy, that kind of stuff. But
yeah.
this idea of using magic as the endpoint being to know thyself is is somewhat new.
Mm,
But that doesn't mean that it can't be a part of magic. I think that a lot of cases, when one thinks of that being the goal and ambition of magic, you're putting the cart before the horse. I think
mm,
that with me engaging in a lot of these things magically, eventually I'm going to know myself along the way. I don't have that as the end point or as the end goal, but I've learned when I talked about how I was going towards Thelema and the Golden
mm.
Dawn, that was when I was a bit more mystical, and I did really think that that was the point of magic. Since abandoning that, I've learned far more about myself, and this is something I'm sure that you can attest to, is that sometimes you just have to let go of the thing that you think is the actual goal, and just again getting back to the howness of something by engaging in a process for the sake of that process itself, and you get usually the things that you're after.
Yes, that's interesting, because that sort of ties in with. I was listening to your program about um, Spare,
Okay.
Austin Osman Spare,
Yeah.
and I mean, what an incredible artist! Apart from the fact that he was gifted in many other ways and stuff,
Yeah.
but that sort of thing of putting yourself in that point, there's something. I can't remember who it was who said he would. I think it was Kenneth Grant, wasn't he? Said he was sort of shamanic.
Yes. Yeah.
And there is something in that thing about the shamanic thing, because a lot of shaman, it's like they're just doing what they do.
Yeah.
They're a conduit to something, and
Yeah.
within that process, they've got to be in the right state to be that thing.
Mhm.
But it's not like, this is a sweeping statement, but yeah, and I've met a couple of shaman. I mean, sort of
Right.
Amazonian shaman.
Got
So
it.
I've got just a little bit of a mix of terms, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
Um, and they don't strike me as holy men, but they strike me as being very special people.
Specialized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Whereas I've actually met somebody who I could actually go, if there was somebody who said, "Have you ever met a holy man?" I can go, yes.
Mhm.
But he's not involved in magic in any shape or form. But he
No.
is somebody who just happens to be a peace activist, but he is an extraordinary person. Um, so there is something within that. And again, this is like playing with concepts, isn't it? Which again takes us back sort of to chaos magic, really.
Yeah.
Um, what is it that you have to embody for something like, you know, a spell or a ritual to happen, which might be different from what you have to embody to do maybe a Golden Dawn ritual.
Yeah.
And I can look at that from the point of that thing of creating music or play, or improvisation is a good example to this in music. There's a certain state of mind that you go into to improvise. And of course, when you get good at it, you don't even realize you're going there, but you do realize that when you're there, and sometimes you really suddenly are aware that you're somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I don't see any difference. There is, there's certain gear changes and stuff, but the general sort of feel of it is similar somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just something that I'm sort of pondering and play with quite a bit, this sort of idea. Yeah, anyway, sort of gone off
I,
on a bit of a tangent there.
no, it's all good. I've always thought, though, and I can speak for myself, and particularly because, I mean, people might roll their eyes when I say that my podcast is a creative endeavor.
Mm,
It really is for me, but I put a ton of work into it. But initially, at the outset, I was doing a lot of rituals based around not a figure that would be based on creativity. Like if you were to ask most people that are somewhat magically operant, they'd say, "Oh, you have to do rituals to Hermes. You have to do rituals to Thoth, the ibis-headed Egyptian god of writing and mathematics and speech and all of those things. Those are what you have to do." And for myself, I was going towards the unofficial patron saint of necromancy, which would be Saint Cyprian of Antioch, and I was just asking, like, I need some inspiration and for this. And at this point, or at least at the point when I first started my podcasting, it wasn't, as I was said earlier about doing the Golden Dawn stuff, where it was more about the what. It was the whatness of the ritual. That's where
yes.
the magic comes from.
Yeah.
But it was more about the how of it. And so I was just basically like, I just need this stuff, and just however it occurs, just let it occur. And in a way, the things that started to come to me were, I mean, we call it inspiration, we can call it spirit, we can call it whatever you want, but I'm less willing to put an explanation on it than anything else. I was just involved in the process of it, and so in that way, I get what you're saying about something like improvisation. It's a lot of times I think that, and I can only speak for magicians. I mean, I'm a terrible, terrible musician. I can play the spoons okay, but this idea of just being able to, and I'm sure somebody else has said this on your show, just being able to surrender to inspiration when it occurs, just be able to go like, all right, like just let things happen. Every idea is a good idea. Just go with it. And I think that there's a lot to be put into that. And it goes back to that person that we talked to at the beginning of the show, Carl Jung, who basically says that human beings don't have ideas. Ideas have human beings.
Yes, and
Right?
I would
And
say that's the same with songs.
yeah. Yes, we don't create this music. This
No,
music has created us.
no. I often quote Keith Richards actually, because Keith Richards
Nice.
had this thing that's saying they're already out there. You just
Yeah,
have to get your guitar and sort of hook them in,
that's right.
and it is like that. And the more you think like that, this is what I find fascinating. The more you think like that, the more songs come, and it's like you're honoring the fact that it's not you. You're part of the process, obviously,
Yeah.
but it's not you.
No.
Um, and yeah, I've got quite a lot of respect for Keith Richards because he sort of
Me
hits
too.
he hits the nail on the head in the most unexpected way, which I absolutely love about him. But that is so true. And interesting, something that you said earlier about chaos magic. Obviously starting in the sort of 70s. Um, Interestingly, the music scene in the 70s in Britain was like chaos magic. It
Very
was
much so.
like there's a whole bunch of stuff, and you just stole and dipped into everything and just see what worked. So you had obviously sort of the rock and roll stuff. You had all the stuff from the 60s and the rock music things, the Zeppelin stuff, and you had reggae
Yeah.
and ska music, and it was all there. And you look at that and you think, what a melting pot.
Yeah.
And you ended up with the type of stuff. So it's interesting. There's a similarity in that sort of thing of just dip into that and take this idea and stick it over there with that, and take this punk chord progression and then syncopate the chords in the middle bit, and you've got a police song.
My favorite, I'm just going to toot my own horn here for a second. I love British music from 1976 to, well, to now, basically. But I used to work at a record store, and so I loved everything that England was producing from 76 to, I'm just going to say 86. I love punk music. Punk music, particularly in England, was fantastic. But the bands that I really gravitate towards were the bands that, after the initial impulse of punk happened, uh, were able to reassemble it in some. I'm going to use the word alchemical because it'll
Yes.
make me sound awesome, but reassemble it in an alchemical fashion. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Howard Devoto and Magazine, but this is this band where they the guitar lines sound like they're ripped from John Barry's James Bond
Yeah,
themes.
yeah, yeah.
The bassist is taking all of their bass riffs from reggae and dub that was around at the time. The synthesizers are straight out of Rick Wakeman. Like it's incredible what they all were able to put back. And in a way, it's more punk than punk was. But they were so young when they did this, and that's the other thing that, like, I almost want to say, like, they had a childlike abandon to be able to come
Yeah.
up with what they did. And I find it so utterly fascinating. That period of time in England is incredible. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that, I didn't experience it. People like Phil Hine, who did and who was there, they can probably speak to it more. But there was just a sense that what had come before was just not good enough, or it didn't hit where they were trying to be. And so they were just like, we're
Yeah.
going to do our own thing. So
Yeah,
anyways,
exactly. I mean,
I'll always plug a magazine. Apologies. It's not when I'm on
no,
the
no,
show,
no, it's
but
cool. That's cool. It's cool. I mean, so many really great bands. And what was interesting about it is that because obviously, you know, the UK is such a small place,
mm,
and uh, that sort of cross fertilization and of music, and the fact that you could go and see a band anywhere. There's bands playing in pubs and village halls and whatever. And when I was at school, there were God knows how many bands. I
right?
mean, it's not so good now. I've got a
No.
couple of lads I've been teaching who really are. they've within within a couple of years of like not really being able to do very much, they're writing some really stunning, very sort of punky sort of rock stuff. Great sort of 3.5 minute pop songs, basically.
Hmm.
So it's still out there. There's still a lot of
Yeah.
characters, doing things. But I think with those, they've really got to grips with what was happening with that sort of period that you're talking about.
Yeah.
They could easily understand, and they listen to sort of things that are very wide range of music. But they sort of know that stuff right back to the blues.
Hmm.
So they understand. The guitarist is a really good blues player, but they're playing sort of more sort of punky rock stuff. Because I think it's about language. So interestingly, going dovetailing back here about language, you were talking about the Greek magical papyri.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there'll be some people who listen to this will know what we're talking about, but there's a lot of weird words in there on there. So there is something about the power of the sound of words, and even words that on the face of it sort of don't mean anything, or they're names of something that are almost impossible to pronounce.
Yes.
I think probably the easiest way to explain it is a bit like an Englishman trying to learn Greek.
Yes. Very much
Because
so.
all the consonants are in the wrong place, type of thing, and it's like you can't get you. But they're sort of like that, but worse.
Yes. They're
So there's
called
some
barbarous words. The
barbarous,
barbarous words.
barbarous words, barbarous names. Yeah. So what do you? I'm just going to throw this question at you because this is something I've pondered this myself, but I've never asked anybody else. What sort of thing happened when you first started to try to do a spell like that with these? Because obviously sometimes there's like 15 names all stretched out one after another. What happened first of all? Did you just get tongue-tied, or did you
Yeah.
sort of realize that something weird was going on in your head? Or
Well, okay, when I initially started using the barbarous words, but yeah, it is like e, ah, o, all of these kind of things. Initially, because I was just kind of coming off of, I was detoxing from the Golden Dawn and Thelema stuff, which includes it. Like
yeah,
Crowley included
yeah,
the headless right in
headless, right?
his version of the Goetia. But anyways, um, initially I was like, I have to get the words exactly right. Like I want to be able to. So I would go to like a Koine Greek pronunciation guide. I really wanted to try and
All
get it
right, you really,
as close. I wanted to be as specific. But this goes back to, if not the theme of this show, I was concentrating on the what of the language itself and not the actual how of these words. It wasn't until I kind of surrendered, because I would hit up like occult forums and stuff like that, and they're like,
yeah,
"No, you have to get it absolutely right." And so when it was coming out of my mouth, it sounded like an accountant and was trying to speak these
yeah,
things that you can tell they're charged with some kind of magic. And I'm not trying to say that to, like,
no,
if you
no,
look at it, it looks really strange. So it wasn't until I surrendered to, okay, like how exactly am I going to try and pronounce these words? And they're meant to be spoken aloud. They're not meant to be said under your breath, like you're reading a
no, no.
book, like they. It has to come from the diaphragm. It doesn't matter what they are, but you find when you hang on certain words, particularly for me, it's e or
Yeah,
when you hang on that, your diaphragm does this really weird thing where it's almost like it's bouncing around in your chest and in the top of your throat, at the back of your mouth. That, I'm not going to say it like produces a different state of consciousness, but it will. Um, I just found that when I was able to surrender with like getting rid of the what, getting rid of like being able to like get it absolutely correct. And there are some people that would say you have to get it absolutely correct, but more so the how of just being able to use these words and bellow them is where a lot of the magic comes from.
mm,
And somebody who put it very well as far as this kind of stuff is concerned, because it comes up also a lot in the grimoires, whether one says they're speaking to something like Adonai or Adonai, or something like this. And this is a guy by the name of Lon Milo Duquette.
Oh yeah, yeah, I've heard it long. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he basically said like the best way to try and think about these kind of stuff, because a lot of times you are trying to get an entity, an infernal spirit, or something to respond to you. He says try to think of it as an American tourist going to France, going to Paris specifically, and ordering something off the menu. You're going to try and speak French. This tourist is going to try and speak French to the waiter, and he's going to try his best. The waiter already knows English, so they'll nod respectfully, be like, "Oh, okay." And then they'll answer you in English because they want to get on with their job and they want to do their things. So that's my approach as far as these barbarous words. It's trying to get as close as possible, but more so how one is
yeah.
using this language that is the most important bit. And to speak back just briefly on the kind of thing that I think maybe a lot of your listeners would like, there is a power in spoken word. There is a power in using your voice, very much so. And it really can, and you can attest to this, I'm sure, when these acts are being performed, they do certain things, whether that is your brain, whether that is your soul, who knows what I'm not too big at putting explanations on them, but you will notice a phenomena when you engage with a certain kind of language. The barbarous words that are in the Greek magical papyri are just one sort of this, but such things were very popular in I believe it was 12th century Spain with the Kabbalists there, like Abulafia. If they look into this, like that's the kind of stuff. Like a lot of people are really enamored with the Kabbalah, particularly Hermetic Kabbalah, as promulgated by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Go back to like actual like Spanish Kabbalists. Things like Abulafia, he's got, oh my goodness, I forget the name of the text, but it's just basically a form of Jewish prayer and chanting. And if you do it, like it's really quite incredible what can occur. So I do think that that this language and this use of language and this use of speaking with people, it's always about the how. I think, and for musicians and artists, I would say if they take one thing from this episode, engage with the howness of the things, not so much the what. And to even go back to something you said earlier, you are part of the process of these things. By you engaging in this process, that in itself is a magical act. That in and of itself is an artistic act to the point where the line blurs to a wonderful degree.
Yes,
I
it's
went on for a long time there.
no, that's wicked. It's wicked. Um, you know, when you create art, you write a song. I think certainly you mentioned John Lennon. I'm sure John Lennon was aware that he was doing something that could change the world. Obviously, Imagine's a good example of that. But I think obviously all you need is love, because really that song is just a mantra,
Exactly.
and
It's just the same thing
and
over and
it's
over again.
yeah, and Lennon would have known that. He wasn't silly. He knew what he was doing. I mean, there's lots of great examples of uh, the sort of rhetoric, the rules of rhetoric. There's a really good book. I can't remember the guy who wrote it now, but it's about the rules of rhetoric and where they appear. And he quotes John Lennon a lot, because it's like the Beatles were doing this all the time. Different sort of techniques of repeating words or having alliteration and all the rest of it. And I think certainly by the time we got to Sergeant Pepper, there was so much stuff going on. And that's the thing, really, when we sort of see, I think a lot of magic goes on in plain sight, and we don't recognize it as that.
Yeah.
Um, and this is why I think it's important for people to realize the power of their own thoughts and how they direct their thoughts. And people, I don't know, because you mentioned something earlier about there are actually quite a lot of people. Oh. Oh,
Yeah, I don't know why.
That's okay. Don't worry.
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry about that.
That's
I
okay.
don't know what happened there.
That's okay. Perhaps the space gremlins, the Zoom gremlins, were a bit concerned about
The worst.
the level of the level of disclosure into the workings of the universe. Yeah, so I was saying that I think it's important for people to be aware of how, the universe is magical. Nature's magical.
I think so.
And I think if we become more aware of that, this is sort of an animist thing, isn't it, really? I think this is
Yes, very much so.
This is what's really beginning to, I think, tip up in science now. It's how far, it's a bit of a slippery slope, isn't it? Once you get away from materialism, you start going, well, maybe this type of thing has got consciousness. And then it's like, well, so if the planet's got consciousness, then so what about the sun?
Yeah.
And it gets a bit like, okay. So it becomes a bit of a slippery slope until you suddenly go, well, actually, everything has consciousness, but, it's not the consciousness that we understand probably, but.
Yeah.
And then, because often when I'm teaching kids to write, I often say the song lives. The song is a thing. And then it starts to go into, like your podcast is a living thing.
Very much so.
Yeah, and you're probably aware of that, aren't you? So
very much so.
So I was going to say about your actual your podcast. You do an incredible amount of reading. That's something that really is impressive, and it really comes across it actually in the podcast. How well read you are. How well you connect that stuff up, because it is really difficult to do that. So how much time do you spend? Okay, this is a bit of a stupid question, but I was going to say, how much time does it take you to really sort of prep up on a subject? Because some of those subjects must be not necessarily in the field that you're comfortable with, because it's quite diverse the things that you've covered in the podcast.
How long does it take me to, if I could give per episode, I probably spend 60 hours of work per episode. Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. Seriously.
Some of the stuff is, well, okay, I'll use an example. Last August, I was going to go on vacation, and I needed an episode to do an episode very quickly. And I needed to get it out into the world because I was leaving in like 3 days. So in that instance, one of my Patreon supporters was like, I'd like to do a show at some point about this topic. And it was a topic that I am overly familiar with, which is called, it's Goetia. So the Ars Goetia is a grimoire based on, or just taking the name from Goetia, but truly Goetia is like I'm going to use the word sub-shamanic early funerary practice, which became in some way democratized in ancient Greece. Yeah. So that was an episode that took me all work, maybe 10 hours, just because I knew so much. But for topics I spend recorded, I'm currently researching my next episode. It's every day I work on my episode for at least 8 hours. It's a job, and it has become my job. So yeah, I put in a lot of work. A lot of the knowledge is in my head already, or maybe not, but wherever you want to say, but a lot of the knowledge is already there. It's just about being able to put the things in the right places. And I love that process. That's really my jam. And once it's formulated and once it's ready to go into the world, I'm the happiest person, and I can't wait to get started on the next thing.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Excellent stuff. Right. So I'm going to put all details in the show notes so people can actually get to your podcast.
Wonderful.
What other things? Are there any other things? Particularly, you spent so long on each episode. Are there any other things you got in the sort of pipeline?
Well, as of now, no. I'm just kind of continuing doing the podcast stuff. I also have a Patreon, and I'm hoping I'm just not plugging the Patreon here.
No, but I know you do a lot of
stuff
stuff off the Patreon, don't you? Yeah, because you do other videos and stuff like that.
Yeah, videos for my Patreon content. So right now it's pretty all encompassing. My work being more video based. There's only so much that you can talk about magic. I think in some ways, more people will learn more about magic if it's more of a show, not a tell kind of thing.
No, I get what you mean. Super.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll put some stuff in the show notes then, Douglas.
Wonderful.
That's brilliant. And thanks. I mean, that was such a great chat. That's really good. And I'm really
thank you, Nick. This has been joy.
Okay, you're breaking up a little bit, so I'm gonna.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's not your fault. I don't quite know. It's the gremlins. It's quite fascinating because as soon as you started talking about Ars Goetia, you went, "What?" So I'll catch up with you soon. So thanks ever so much for that. It was really fascinating.
Infernal spirits in the machine.
And with that, in true magician style, he disappeared. We managed to get back and chat again after the recording had finished, but I wasn't sure which end of Zoom was the problem. But anyway, check out Douglas's podcast. It really is brilliant, and he's got a Patreon with lots of very interesting things that he does there. So the details are on the show notes as always. And if you're interested in learning to play the guitar or learning how to write songs, or you're just interested in the sort of crazy NLP stuff that I do, that's all available by visiting my Patreon, which again is on the show notes. So until next time, see you then.